naval commander, attorney, and he has a new book. And you can invite them to tell you a little bit about themselves too, to give you a place to be involved.
Yeah, so you all want to be writers. Is that why you're in this class, or you just want to learn more about writing, or you are writers and you want to learn some tricks of the trade? How does that go? Any takers for that? I'd like to find out who you guys are. Do you have to call on someone?
It's kind of a mixture.
Yeah? Which one are you?
I'm going to be a teacher.
A teacher, so you just want to be able to tell students about writing and how to write stories and things like that.
Basically.
Gotcha. All right. Anybody else? What about you?
I'm going into sports journalism, so.
So you just kind of want another dimension. You want like storytelling added
Yeah.
to it. What's the name of this class actually?
Well, we call it writing for writers.
Writing?
There's a more, what's
It's
the
like
word?
professional writing or something.
Yes, they have the correct name of it. We call it writing for writers.
Professional writing, this class is.
Intro to
Professions
writing.
and, yeah.
Professions in writing, yes. So they're meeting their goal is to, every day, meet someone who has a job as a writer of some sort of fashion. Like on Tuesday, J.D. Lester came in, who went to high school with Todd, and she came in and talked about children's books
Okay,
and that half, so.
all right.
So
Got
you
it.
can talk about your blogging and your book that you just
But-
wrote.
My blogging, yeah, I have 3 blogs. Well, first let me just, my main job is as a lawyer, and lawyers always have to have cards, so I've brought a few just to give you something, put something in your hand. Okay, yeah, my day job is as an attorney in private practice, which is good because it's kind of high wages, high hourly rate. Fortunately, back when I started out, I went to Asbury College right up the road here, and then when I graduated as a history major, I got out and went right into the Navy. And I spent 6 years on active duty. Then I got out and I went to law school. And then actually I stayed in the Navy Reserve and ended up going overseas quite a bit. And never really felt comfortable in the Navy. It wasn't really my thing. Didn't really have a passion for it ever. But it's just one of those things. It was a good job for a history major right out of school. So I did that. I went and I saw the world. And I picked the Navy because I like their uniforms the best, I guess. You get to travel overseas, which was really nice. And I did that for 6 years, but again, never really felt comfortable doing that. Got out, thought the master plan was to go to law school, so I did that. Maybe helped me pay for that. And practiced for a couple of years, but then just gravitated back toward the reserve because it was good money, and again, it takes you out of Lexington for a while. Took me over to Italy most of the time, where I was working on shore base and on ships as well. And never felt comfortable with that, never felt comfortable with being a lawyer. Still don't feel like a lawyer. You know, you're looking for different career paths. I don't know that I've found mine. I've always written though. Writing has always been something that I've done. I wrote in my first stories in high school, and then in college I took a creative writing class and wrote some stories there, but then I gave it up because when you're first starting out in the Navy, you don't have time for doing other things. So I gave that up until my last year or so in the Navy. An idea for a novel came to me, and I just started writing it. So I wrote that first novel before I got out of the Navy, and then I finished it up when I got out, took a year off before going to law school. And I sent that around to some people, some agents, and some publishers to see about it. I got some very complimentary responses back then to it. It was, in a weird way, it's this same novel. This is my 8th novel now, but the first one that I wrote was this same novel in a way. I guess you kind of have something to tell, and it's going to come out. You're going to keep telling that story in multiple different ways. And so that novel is very similar to this one, although I've changed a little bit, so the novel's a little bit different. It was it was it was like a serial killer kind of novel. And that's kind of important because through all of the 8 novels that I wrote, I kind of came to an understanding that you have to give the people what they want at some level of writing. I mean, you can't just write for yourself. You've got to write for your audience, and you've got to write something that they grasp and understand. This is just my view,
Well,
obviously.
and we talked, Tom Marksberry was here last week, and he talked about, he's been on the same novel for 25 years, hasn't sold it, hasn't, so, I mean, your process was to get readers. I mean, so you wanted somebody to read your novel, and so
Right.
you've adjusted your format of it, so.
Right, well, that first one, it was a kind of it was a police detective kind of novel. People can grasp that. And then, as I went through the other eight novels, they got away from that and more toward, I just came up with this idea from my life, it seems interesting, and it's not interesting to anybody else. Do you know Charles Flood? He's a history writer. He wrote he lives in Richmond now, he's quite old. Back in the 50s, he wrote a novel that was on the bestseller list called Love is a Bridge. It was very well received at the time, and I read it later, and it's not a novel that's really gonna be interesting to anyone today, but I read it just because I knew him, and it was a good read. But after that, he went to Harvard, and after that, that success, he was not able to match the success as a novelist. And he said that he had a book friend, and he showed a book-selling friend, and he showed him this novel, his next novel, and the question he asked him is, why am I reading this? That's really a key that you need to be able to ask yourself and answer all the time about your audience. Why are they reading this? And you need to be able to answer that like with the first sentence, with the first paragraph, the first page, the first chapter. They have to understand why they're reading what they're reading. And let me give you an example from this. This is your basic murder mystery. So when you open up with police people and a dead body, your reader knows why they're reading. They know exactly why they're reading. They know what they're going to get with this kind of novel. They're going to get clues, and they're going to get police people interviewing suspects. So that's one way to kind of answer that question, is go with a format that people understand. Go with a format that people know. And that's exactly why I went with this. This is kind of in a funny way, it's kind of has a funny edge to it. In a funny way, it's so strict on being a mystery novel that it's kind of funny. At least I find it funny. So that's one way to let your reader know exactly why they're reading. Give them a format that they've seen before, and then fill it up with your content. Otherwise, if you pick a different type of plot or different type of story, you've got to be keenly aware to let your readers know right off the bat why they're reading what they're reading. And there's a lot of art to that. You've got to figure out how to do that with your plot. One, Anthony Burgess, who wrote The Clockwork Orange, he said, he's famous for having said there are only two types of plots. One is a stranger comes to town, and the other is someone goes on a journey. Those are the two plots that you have. Others have said there are 24 different plots. You know, there are books with plots, and then others have said, you know, maybe there's 5. Maybe Aristotle said there are a few. But anyway, you have to get familiar with those. And if you get familiar with those, you can kind of use the mechanics of those to tell your story. And if you think you're going to invent a new plot, you're probably wrong. Stick with what's been done. Use those mechanics artfully, and tell your story. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Beyond the creative writing course I took in college, I haven't done any, I haven't taken any type of classes. I've read a lot of books on writing, but there's a Slaughterhouse-Five. What's the guy's name?
Kurt Vonnegut.
Kurt Vonnegut. You probably heard his advice on writing. He said, somebody asked him what was his advice on learning how to write. Well, he said, read and write a lot. That's true, and that's kind of the method I've taken. There's also another like a fantasy or sci-fi writer, and I haven't been able to find his name, and I've looked and looked, but he had some good advice too. He said, if you want to become a good writer, write 1,000,000 words. After you've written 1,000,000 words, you're pretty much going to know how you write, what you write, and you'll have gotten to a certain level. I've certainly written 1,000,000 words. I've written 8 novels, and so that's kind of the methodology I've taken. It's kind of a stubborn methodology, I think, because a lot of people would have gone to an MFA program, and those are good, especially if you can get into one of the higher upper echelon MFA programs. It's going to give you connections. It's going to teach you a lot about writing, and it's going to give you connections. The other programs, I think, don't give you those connections and won't help you up the business of writing, but the really upper ones will. And I think that a lot of the people who are getting published now are coming out of MFA programs. But I didn't want to do it stubbornly. I just wanted to kind of follow my own muse, I guess you'd say. And so that's what I've done.
What would you say about travel for writing and the habits of writing, that sort of thing, since you spent time overseas?
Travel.
I mean, like for every good cook, that's the first piece of advice for chefs, is that it's like, get on the road, see what other people are doing, and it gives you material to bring back as a chef, and my brother's a chef, so it's, a lot of people say that to writers as well. It's like, hit the road, as much as you can. Would you say that informed your path?
Well, I think that, you can write for entertainment as a writer. You can write an entertaining novel. But if you want to write an artistic novel, if you want to write something that will have some meaning to someone, you've got to have life experience. And traveling will help that. But you don't need to, you can say traveling, you don't need to leave Lexington to do that. You need to get out and live life. And look inside yourself. I mean, looking inside yourself is as interesting as traveling to Italy. You'll find most of life's answers inside yourself, I've found. But you have to dig deeply, and if you're not willing to do that, you're really probably not going to become an artist as a writer. You might be able to write an entertaining novel, but it's going to be something that somebody's going to put aside. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is a rounded question. Okay, just speaking most specifically of your most recent book, you say you keep telling that story you keep telling it over and over again, just in different ways. When you were writing that book, you said you're going to look and you're going to see and you're going to ask questions and have questions answered. Would you consider, when you were writing it, do you ever consider, like, how Ayn Rand wrote The Fountainhead? She told the story, but there was a lot of underlying messages. Is that what you were thinking when you wrote this, or is this what you think when you're writing other things? You said, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not very clear the way I said it. But
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, yeah.
because yours is more philosophical, and it's more take a look and pay attention in your message.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I would guess, and I'm guessing that all of the 8 novels are trying to tell kind of the same thing, or trying to get at the same thing. The first one was called The Good and the Just, and it was a police, like I say, a serial killer kind of thing, and it brought in Nietzschean philosophy.